9/11 started out like most mornings. You just get up, the alarm goes off, and you get ready to go to work. Little did I know my whole world was going to change that morning. Got into work, and roughly my desk literally shifted from the wall. It was like nothing we've ever felt before. So everybody just looked at each other and was like, well, what was that? Strobes went off and the sirens went off, and everybody just was listening for the announcements of what to do next. And then my supervisor came through and she was like, okay, we're holding yet. And then my manager came through and was like, we have to go. We've got to go now. We just started to funnel, and then I was like, wait a minute, my freezer. So I funneled the opposite direction from what they wanted us to do. And I went to go past to make sure she was okay. But as you entered the hallway, the smell was unreal. And you immediately realized it was gas. So we thought a gas line exploded. But as you passed the elevator doors, they were sucked in, so they kind of looked like a C shape almost. And we just kept going towards the ladies' room, and my boss was like, well, make sure that she's okay. But you have to head into the staircase to get down. And I was like, okay, but I need to know that she's all right. So he opened up the ladies' room door and was like, there's nobody here. Because we went that way, we ended up in a staircase that's considered an external stairway. And we didn't know that it was a plane until somebody called their spouse. So as we were funneling into the stairs, because now you have to imagine people are already starting to walk down. You can only get in like one person at a time. Somebody in front of us gets a phone call, and we found out that a plane hit the building. So we were basically just amazingly calm how people stood. I mean, going down the steps and funneling information back to each other. And I could remember the gentleman behind me nudging, and I was leaning on my faith about as hard as I could lean and praying just to get out of the building. I just wanted to go home. I wanted to see my family. I had a lot of pain in my back at that point, and my legs were going numb, because you have to realize we were on the 35th floor. So walking down those steps, it's like 2 full flights, so it's 14 and then 14 before you get to the landing. And I just kept praying, and I was like, Lord, I know you're busy right now, but I can't do this without you, because I'm hurting and I can't, everything is going numb. Could you walk with me? And I am a firm believer in angels. I've believed in angels my entire life. And I said to him, if you can't, can you send somebody to walk with me? I can't explain the feeling that comes over you when you know that everything's going to be okay. Well, it just kind of washed over. And it felt like somebody took their hand and put it on the small of my back and stood me straight. There was no more pain. There was no more tingling. I couldn't feel anything, but I couldn't feel the pain either. And I walked and continued to walk. And the information just kept coming up the stairway. Like, it's dim here. There's water. Be careful. Hold on. When we got to the bottom, I mean, I remember every face of every fireman walking up the steps as I was coming down. I can remember their faces and how the older ones had like more of a solemn look, like they didn't want to have expression, but you kind of could see it in their eyes that they knew they weren't going to come back down. When I got to the bottom, there was an officer there, and he was looking up, and at the time we didn't know why he was looking up, but basically he was looking up for debris. And he told us, okay, you see the door over there? I want you to hit that door running. If you drop something, it's gone. Don't stop, don't go back for it, keep going. So when he told me to go, I went, and I hit the door. And on the inside of the financial center, the cops are all, and the EMS guys, come on. They wanted you to get through and away from the building. When we got out the other side, the lady I was looking for was standing right there. And she was like, they wouldn't let me go back to get you. I had to come for you. And I was like, well, I went to look for you. So we hugged.
Okay. Well, I'm not gonna be mad about you because you guys, you're clever, you're pretty friends. Hey, don't you want plushies? Oh yeah, let's check out more of those. Why? Well, epic. So does your friend go down? Wow. Man, oh, what? Just two. Oh. Okay, we're friends. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Someone who appreciates my freaking channel. Yeah. Yeah, some of them appreciate it. Hey, you want to see the second one? Okay, I'll be here. I want to see you put it on. Yeah, this is mine. This is mine. This is for my brothers. Yeah, my younger self is telling the truth. That is my brother's puppet. Yeah. Which I still have today. I don't know what
So this is it. This is, I called my fiance at the time on the phone. She was in a panic. I said, I'm down here. I'm all right. I'm doing my job. I said, it's a disaster. There are people, there are bodies everywhere. I said, but we're going to be okay. With that, I hung up the phone. This was before the second plane hit. I hung up the phone. The second plane hits the building. She sees it on television. She collapses. He's right there. He's right there. He's gone. The plane just hit the building. He's right there. He just spoke to me. He's right at the foot of the Trade Center. I didn't get in touch with her until later on that day to let her know what was going on.
Can you describe what the debris was, I mean, the amount of it, what it was like?
The amount of debris falling from the sky was papers and computer pieces and parts of desks and furniture, but it had collided. It was just raining paper and debris and dust all over the street. It was constantly coming down. It was as if it was a ticker tape parade where people were just throwing bundles of paper out the window. It was hard to imagine. It's hard to believe that all of this was blown out from the force of what I thought was a small airplane. But this is what was going on, and inside, you had droves of people that were coming down and trying to follow our directions to send them, because it's panic now. Everybody remembers 1993 and the World Trade Center being attacked. So now this is going through their heads. We're under attack. So now people are just looking to get out the best way they can, but now they're following instructions. Not enough credit was given to the people inside the building. They were organized. They were listening to our instructions. They were helping one another. Nobody was just running amok and just running out the door and leaving their loved ones behind, leaving their co-workers behind. At one point, I saw a blind man with a seeing eye dog. It's hard to talk about. But his normal direction, his normal way of leaving the building must have been blocked. And I could see him walking around in circles in the panic and the pandemonium. And I grabbed two Wall Street looking guys in suits. He says, get that guy and don't let him go. They grabbed the guy, they grabbed the dog, they got under his arm. They carried that guy 4 blocks to the subway. They never once let him go. I was so proud that they never ran off on their own and left him behind. Because at that point they could have, and everybody would have understood that it was every man for himself. They took that guy and they carried him all the way, and I watched them to make sure that they didn't leave him behind because I was going to go get him. They took him, yes sir, no problem. They took him all the way down the stairs. I was very, very proud of the New Yorkers that day. While this is all going on, and the people are now leaving the building, they begin to slow down. Not as many people are coming down. A woman comes up to me and she says, my husband's a firefighter. His name is Danny Potter. He works in your firehouse. I says, I know Danny. He's okay. He's still out in the street. Everything is fine. I said, but you have to leave. She walked through the door. Another woman followed her. She walked through the door. I'm standing with the 40 firefighters. The lights go out. The building collapses. I'm in a sheer panic. I'm right in between the doorway, the revolving door between building number 1 and building number 2. I see the woman who went through the door. She tries to come back towards me. I grab her hand. I can't pull her through. Something lands on her and kills her on the other side of the door. We're in total darkness. As I'm holding her hand, she's not coming. Something is holding her back. I let go of her. I get thrown into the air from the force of the wind of the building coming down. And I'm literally like a rag doll being tossed around. I'm flailing my arms. And I land on the floor and I up against the wall. And I'm screaming, God, please save me, please. I don't want to die. After about 11 seconds, it stops. And we're in complete quiet, total silence. Darkness, hot ash hits me in the face. I can't breathe. remember I have my air cylinder on my back. I turn on my air cylinder. I go to put my mask on my face that we breathe in fires. It's filled with dust. I put my mask on my face. I'm covered completely in dust. I suck dust down my throat. So now I'm like, oh my God, I survived this, and now I'm going to die from asphyxiation in the building. I shake out the mask. I put it on my face. I get 2 good, clean hits of air. Now I'm starting to rationalize a little bit. I can think. I'm in complete darkness. I'm walking through the building. I come to an area, I have a little flashlight on my head, and I come to an area where it's a security booth, and I can see the security guard is killed. He was hit by some kind of debris, beam, some part of the building, concrete. There's nothing I can do for him. But I see in front of me the elevator bank, and the elevators had crashed down, and there were people thrown out onto the floor. Nobody's moving. Only able to see a few feet in front of me, I hear voices, people telling me, don't leave us, we're still alive. But I can't find anyone. It's pitch black. I can't find them. It's debris. I'm crawling over debris everywhere. As this is occurring, and I'm now in the building for about a good 10 minutes, panicking that I can't get out of here, that I'm going to be trapped in here, I see on the wall on the right side a big square window of light. It's all completely light gray, and everything else is dark. That's a window. That's my way out. Again, to me, a sign from God to show me in all this darkness a window, a way out. As I approach the window, I run into an escalator. The escalator had been right in front of the window. I believe the debris had fallen on the top of the escalator, and the escalator held, and it held the debris up. And underneath the escalator was a window. I got to the window. I could see outside. I'm outside. I can feel the fresh air. I turn around into the darkness. I take my flashlight off my helmet, and I wave it into the darkness, and I yell back into the trade center, if anyone can see my light, this is a way out, follow my light. With that, 5 people come up from the basement. A firefighter and 5 civilians. They come up, I run off to the left with the firefighter and 2 of the civilians. The other civilians run to the right. They're killed by the other building collapsing on them. They never made it. They got halfway down the block and they were crushed. We ran out into the street. I turned around to see what was going on. The top of the North Tower is now collapsing and falling towards me. So now we start running. I said, I can't outrun this building. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to get hit by this building collapsing on me. I make it about a block and a half away, and I laid down in the field, an area where they were doing construction work, and I figured if this is it, just let it be quick. And I covered my face, and with that, the building went in on itself. And I was completely engulfed in the dust that you see on videos that completely shadowed everybody. And I thought in that dust there must have been hot fire and ash, and this was just going to consume me, and they were going to find me out here. But it wasn't. It was just dust. And within seconds, it lifted. At that point, I actually believed that I was the last person on the planet. There was complete silence, like a radioactive winter around me. And I said, oh my God, I'm the last person left. No one else survived. Everyone was killed when this building came down. Within seconds, when the dust lifted, I could see gray figures moving around. I was so relieved that I wasn't the last person alive. I get to the water, I run into some of the guys from my company. Now I'm trying to gather information. Did you see Lieutenant Atlas? Did you see Sean Talon, my guys that I was working with that day? You know if they made it. I'm getting conflicted reports. One guy says we haven't seen him. Another guy said I saw him. I think he went to a hospital. I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to go to the hospital. I did my job for today. I'm going to go to the hospital. I'm going to get myself checked out. I'll come back later. I decided to make a phone call to call my family. I'm trying to call my mom. I can't get through. The phone lines are dead. I call an aunt. Her phone rings. An answer machine picks up. I go, you got to be kidding me. How are you not sitting by this phone right now? Somebody's got to answer. She picks up the phone. Oh my God, are you alive? I go, I'm alive. The building collapsed all around me, but I survived. Can you put my mom on the phone? My mom lives downstairs from my aunt. She runs upstairs. She gets on the phone. She says, your brother's down there. Dispatched an hour earlier. He's somewhere at the trade center. I know my job's not over. I have to go find my brother. I survived. I can't go home without him. He's 6 years younger than me, and I love him very, very much. I turn around, I leave my guys. I say, go to the hospital. I'll catch up with you guys later. I got to go look for my brother.
Are you hurt at all, John?
Untouched. The building collapses around me. I am untouched. I don't have a scratch on me. Not a broken limb, not a laceration, nothing. I'm completely covered in dust. And it was hard for me to breathe, but I was untouched otherwise. I come back to the trade center now, and I'm calling on my radio for his company. His company was 220 228. They're not responding. So I'm thinking to myself, this is either really good news, they never made it down here, or this is really bad news, they've all been killed. Because I'm not getting anybody on the radio, so I still don't know. I get back to the Trade Center, and there's chaos everywhere. People are running away, and there's debris in the street, and there are vehicles on fire, and I can see people crawling from underneath part of the pile. So I can't get in touch with my brother. I start looking to see if I can do something to help. So I pull a gentleman out. He was a chief from the 9th Division. I pull him out. He's like, you know, we lost 1,000 firefighters. I'm like, well, we're going to keep looking. We'll try to find as many guys as we can. I come back down to the Trade Center. There's an ambulance on fire. I grab a hose that was just left abandoned in the street. I put out the fire, look in the back of the ambulance, thinking maybe someone was in this ambulance. They abandoned them. There was no one in the ambulance, thank God. I get down to the Trade Center. I'm asking every firefighter I see, did you see 228? No, we didn't see them. Did you see them? We didn't see them. Now about an hour and a half goes by, and now I'm thinking, well, let's put it in the back of my mind and let's just go to work. Let's do what we can. I see a gentleman walking around with a list, a firefighter, a compiled list of people who are missing, firefighters that are missing. They don't know where they are. They don't know if they're dead. They don't know if they're on vacation. They just know that they're not at this site. My brother's name is on the list. Again, I said, put it out of your head. You can't think about this now. You got work to do. There's way too many things to do to be thinking about how you're going to explain to your family that your brother's gone. I come back down toward the Trade Center. I'm working. I can see my firehouse in the distance. On the other side of me, I see a fire hydrant on West Street, and there's just a little bit of water trickling out of the fire hydrant. All the water lines have been severed when the Trade Center's collapsed. It ruptured all the water lines, the water mains in the street. But this one hydrant has a little bit of water trickling out of it. And I'm so hot, I got a cotton mouth, and I'm just dehydrated, so let me just go get some water. And I kneel down on the floor, I'm drinking water, and I look up, my brother comes walking towards the hydrant to get water. Like, how is it that you survived this? How did you survive? You're right here. How did you make it out of there? I said, 1,000 reasons why I should be gone. Only one why I'm alive. God protected me. Put his hands around me. Building collapsed. He spared me from injury. Told me that I have to come and find you. And here we are. We're together. We grabbed each other. We hugged. We said, we're not going to leave each other's side for the rest of the day, but we'll stay down here to do whatever we can. We're so relieved that he was alive, but at the same time so upset that so many other brothers and fathers weren't going to have that reunion. They weren't going to have what I had. There are so many brothers and cousins and fathers and sons that work in the fire department. It's a tradition. It's handed down from family member to family member. They weren't going to have that. So it gave me energy to go back in there to try to do whatever I can to try to find somebody else. Continue working that day. We're doing everything that we have to do to see if we can find people. My brother and I are staying together with one another. At a certain point, I told him I have to go back to my firehouse, see if I can gather information. He goes, all right, I'm going to go look for survivors. My brother winds up being one of the firefighters that are involved in one of the only rescues that day. A gentleman by the name of Pasquale was on the 7th floor landing with about 30 other civilians from his office. And when the building collapsed, he was left on an 18-inch by 18-inch piece of concrete with a piece of railing. The whole building disappeared. All those people that were with him disappeared. He was stuck on that railing 7 stories up with just a little piece of narrow framework below him, so he could not get down. My brother and a couple of the firefighters from Rescue 5 tied a rope off to him, and they lowered him down. He's one of the only rescues to come out of the Trade Center after the collapse of both towers. I do remember when I was in the tower, running from doorway to doorway, and thinking to myself, when I was a child, my mother told me if there's ever an earthquake, you stand in the doorway. I'm thinking, as an adult, when is there going to be an earthquake in New York City? I got to worry about having this information in the back of my head. From the morning of the attack of the Trade Center, I kept thinking, stay in the doorway, just in case any debris falls, the doorway's going to hold. I was in the doorway when the tower collapsed. I don't know that that's what saved my life. That piece of information from my mom and the help from God. I was with 40 other firefighters. Not one of those firefighters I was with came out of that window behind me. The one firefighter from the basement and the 4 civilians that came up with him, the only people to come out of that window. Miracle that I survived? Absolutely. My relationship with God has been absolutely bonded. There's nothing that anyone can tell me that does not exist. There are way too many coincidences. My relationship with him has been great. It continues to be great. That night, I come back to the firehouse. I find out there are a couple of guys missing. We don't know where they are. We're assuming that they were killed in the Trade Center. We still have hope that maybe they were alive. We get word that many of the uniforms are missing off the rack, and that our guys had run to the firehouse, put on their uniforms, and they're missing. So we have a feeling that many of the guys from the firehouse, there are 50 guys that work here, at least half of them are gone. Turns out that a lot of firefighters knew this firehouse was here. They came here to get the gear rather than go to their firehouse and then come back to New York, to Lower Manhattan. They came to our firehouse. They borrowed our gear. They died in our gear. The guys that were missing were beginning to show up at the firehouse. We started to put together that it wasn't them in the Trade Center, but now it's other firefighters that we can't even identify. We have no idea how to know who they are. Later on, they had to do DNA testing to try to find out who these firefighters were. Later on that night, when I'm leaving my firehouse, I had to walk back to Brooklyn. My closest family is in Brooklyn. My car was destroyed. The Trade Center collapsed. So I walk over the Brooklyn Bridge, and everybody along the way is wishing me luck. Man, you did a great job. Thank you so much. And I have that 1,000-mile stare in my eyes, and I'm walking over the bridge, and I'm wearing my fire department gear because there's no way I can part with it at this point. So that night I decide I have to walk home, and once I get over to Brooklyn, maybe I can call somebody to come pick me up because I have a lot of friends and family originally born and raised in Brooklyn. Midway over the Brooklyn Bridge, there's a construction worker standing against the railing, and he's just looking at me. He's watching me come over. It's a short gentleman, black construction worker, and he decides to start walking with me. And he's walking side by side with me, and he tells me, I was working on a rooftop in Brooklyn, and I could see the whole thing. And I'm going, yeah, it's terrible, so many people. And in my mind, I thought 10,000 people. I said, it's got to be 10,000 people died today. They were murdered. They were attacked, and we had no idea that this was coming, so we had no chance. And he's like, well, God has a bigger plan. You have to think that this is God's plan and God's way of doing things, and He made you survive for a reason. You have to tell the story. You were there, and you have to let everyone know about your guys and keep their memory alive and help their families. And I says, yeah, this is a long road now ahead of me. This is something that I have to do, and I'm fortunate to survive and not one of the guys that perished that day, but I am. I'm going to keep their memory alive, and I'm going to talk to their families. I'm going to tell them that their sons and that their husbands died heroes. They were running up the stairs when everybody was running out, knowing that they're not going to come home this day. That's our #1 rule in the firehouse. You come home every day. They knew they weren't. They knew they were going up there for the last time. Nothing was going to stop them when they were watching people jumping from that building. They were ordered to not go up there, and they were going anyway. There was no way that we could stand back and watch people jump. Some people thought the fire department impeded their exit. I said, it was impossible. It was because of us that there was organization, that the chaos came to an organized scene where we were able to evacuate 35,000 people in an hour from the entire World Trade Center area. That is miraculous in itself, in an hour to evacuate a city's worth of people to get them to safety. People have come up to me and they said, where was God that day? You believe in God? I said, He was everywhere. He was in every single firefighter, every single rescue worker, every single person that put themselves in that building to help save people. 343 firefighters died. Not one of them started the day off in that building. Every one of them came here to help. Every one of them put their lives on the line to save the people and the citizens of New York. So God was everywhere. The fact that 2,790 people died is a shame. That if we had more time, I think we would have been able to save more people. But God was doing His best to fight the evil that had been put in front of us, in every single one of us. So anyway, I'm walking with this gentleman on the bridge, and he's discussing the story to me and telling me, you have a bigger plan, an God had a bigger plan. This is all part of life. This is all something that happens to us. Through the bridge, this construction worker is standing there, and this ICE had talked to me, and he's telling me, you know, John, God has a bigger plan for us. This is something that we couldn't avoid. This is something that had to happen, and that Jesus loves every one of us, and he doesn't want to see this happen any more than anybody else, but you survived, and you have a reason for your survival. You have to tell the story. You have to remind everyone about the guys that you lost, and you have to keep this alive. So I'm thinking, all right, it's just two guys talking, no big deal, and we're going over the bridge. I get to the other side, and he wishes me luck. He says, God bless you, and he walks off to a little footpath off to the right. He walks down towards the water, and I continued down the bridge, and there were police officers at the foot of the bridge preventing people from coming over. Manhattan was shut down, and they're watching me come down the bridge, and they're like, oh my God, are you all right? You know, here's a bottle of water. I said, thank you, I'm drinking my bottle of water. I said, can you do me a favor? I said, the construction worker, I said, can you just get him a bottle of water too? He's, you know, he just walked off to the side, and I know he was, you know, he was thirsty and he was hot. And they go, well, what construction worker? I said, the guy that I was walking with. They said, we saw you from midway through the bridge. You were alone. Now I start shaking. I'm thinking to myself, it's not possible. You know, I was talking to this guy for a good 10 minutes walking over the bridge. And they go, listen, you know, you were by yourself. You were walking down the bridge. We watched you. We saw a firefighter coming. We wanted to make sure you were okay. Thinking, you know, maybe you were going to jump or something, so we made sure you were all right. You were alone the whole time. So now I'm thinking to myself, was I just walking with Jesus, or was I walking with a prophet, someone who was giving me information? I don't know how it happens. I don't know how it's supposed to happen. But I survived, and I know the guys that didn't survive, and my job is to tell their story, to keep their memory alive, to talk to their families, to put their hearts and minds at ease about what their husbands and sons were doing that day. So from that day on, I've been talking about them, keeping their memory alive. We've had so many firefighters that left here from after September 11th, and so many new firefighters that come. And the first thing I do is I bring them over to the memorial wall where our guys' images are on the wall, and I tell them, I want you to remember their faces. These guys died. They sacrificed their lives so that the rest of us can carry on, so that we can keep going. They helped save so many people. I want you to know them. I want you to get to know their families. And when they come to that front door and they ring the bell, I don't want you to turn them away. I want you to call them out by name, invite them in, and let them know that they're still part of this family. So far, that has been working out great. We've been keeping that tradition alive. We've helped to raise a lot of money for the families. We've been surrogate fathers for the children. There are 9 children from this firehouse alone who were left fatherless on September 11th. We try to help send them gifts on Mother's Day, and Easter, and Christmas. So we've become part of their life. We're now their extended family. And as they get older and they need their father around, we try to be the father that their father's missing. We try to help them. They have questions. Where should I point my life? Should I join the Army? Should I go for a job? How about college? And we try to help them as best we can. It's difficult because we're not there every day with them, but we do the best we can. And every one of us will sit down and talk to them if they ever have any questions. That's a direct result of what happened on September 11th. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to show you a couple of photographs of some pictures that I put together, because as I talk to the people and they have questions, I just felt it was easier to show them some photographs to try to remember the faces and what the firehouse was like. This is the company. These are the members of 10 House, Engine 10, Ladder 10. There are 50 guys assigned to the companies. Just a picture of Engine 10 with the World Trade Center in the background. It's a photograph of myself on September 11th, just escaping the building after the collapse. You can see in the picture I'm very upset. I thought that everybody I was working with that day was killed, and I thought about 10,000 people just lost their lives. This shows a window from our house watch, in close proximity to us and the South Tower. We're maybe only about 50, 100 yards away from the South Tower. Our firehouse was actually built to help protect the World Trade Center. It was built in 1979, at the completion of the Trade Center, and we'd go there about 600 times a year for emergency calls. So they were basically our twins. They were our babies. We went there all the time. We took pride in it. We added the Twin Towers to our company patch to show our designation, our area that we are with in the fire department. Paul Pancini was killed September 11th. That's what our building looked like. We were a brick-faced building. You can see engine 10, ladder 10, the writing on the wall here that defines our firehouse. On September 11th, this is what our firehouse looked like. When the building collapsed, we left the doors open so people can evacuate through our firehouse. You can see that the letters were blown off the wall just from the force of the wind. I've actually had to meet with Dr. Charles Pellegrino, who's a scientist who studied Mount Vesuvius and the force of the atomic bomb. He sat with me and says, it's a miracle that you're alive. At 1/4 of an epicenter of a nuclear explosion. He said, the wind should have ripped you apart alone. He goes, how you survived that alone is unbelievable. He said, that's a miracle in itself. He said, somehow all the force was deflected away from you. The Trade Center being 100 yards away, we left the firehouse doors open. When the building collapsed, the wind whipped through the firehouse. It buckled steel reinforced doors in the firehouse, in the back of the firehouse. The wind whipped down the corridor, went to the kitchen, whipped around the kitchen, grabbed our refrigerator on the near wall, and pushed it out the window. This is a good distance away, and I was right at the center of that, and somehow, with the help of God, the wind was all deflected away from me. I was lifted up, I was tossed around in the air, and then I laid down and the debris was all pushed beside me. This is a testament of how much debris had fallen just in that area. You can see pictures from my rooftop. I was in here and survived. This building and all this debris had fallen all around me, and I survived. Cars were completely crushed. The air was so thick that the sky was completely blackened. You can see the firefighters barely here. There's probably about 8 stories of debris in front of them. It's almost hard to see. This is what confronted us every day for the next 3 months that we came down here to try to put some kind of order to our lives. Because we are firefighters. What we do is we save lives. We take it very serious. We're professionals. There was nobody for us to save anymore. Our fire trucks were destroyed. Our firehouse was severely damaged. Our neighborhood was gone. The people that lived on the block that we said hello to every morning when they would take their children to school or walk their dogs and we'd feed them dog biscuits were gone. What did we have left? We only had our pride in the fire department, and we weren't about to give that up. So we decided to stay at this firehouse. We cleaned it up, we tried to make it presentable, and we decided to stay here. The city gave us the task of removing body parts from the pile. It was grueling. It was 5 weeks of picking up pieces of human remains. We weren't able to find any full bodies. Everybody was pulled apart. So it got really difficult for us because we're used to saving lives. And now we're not being able to save anyone. We decided to go to the city and we demanded that they put us back as a fire company. And they did. With the help of the people from the neighborhood that sat on the doorstep of City Hall, they spoke with the mayor and they said, we need our company back. You're asking us to move back into the city in Lower Manhattan? We need our protection. The city, back in the end of November of 2001, commissioned 1 engine, and they made ladder Company 10, engine Company 10, ride as an engine. It was one of the proudest moments for us because now we were back online. And ever since that day, we've been moved back into our firehouse after renovations, and we continue to work directly across the street, the same location that we were since 1979. And we take a lot of pride in what we do here, still protecting the civilians and the citizens of New York City.
That is
It's
a story worth hearing.
Thank you very much, Randall. I appreciate you listening.
I know you're on duty and you gotta go, but there is something I've been struggling with, and I don't know if you can help me with it, John, but sure, I hope so. I have no problem believing and accepting that you received a miracle that day. Mr. Pasquale received a miracle. All those other firefighters and civilians who died that day, I mean, they were just as brave as you, I assume. And just as good a man.
We do not understand God's will. That was God's mission. Maybe those firefighters went up there to put the minds at ease of the people that were coming behind them. Maybe they were up there to open up the gates for firefighters that were coming behind them. we don't understand God's will, and we shouldn't try to. He has a much, much bigger plan than we're able to understand. It's beyond our comprehension. The only thing we can do is try to enlighten the world, people that are on our level. We believe so much in freedom that our soldiers are over in Iraq and Afghanistan, dying so that they can have freedom. That's how much we believe in it. That we're willing to put our lives on the line so that someone else can live the freedom that we have. They just want to show the world that there is not necessary for this death and destruction, that you could live free and that you could be prosperous and that you can enjoy your life like we do. And that's our belief. Their belief is different, and we're trying to change the world one part at a time.
Do you think it's foolish of me to think that the courage and the sacrifice of those men who died was a miracle too?
Oh, I don't think it's foolish. I don't think people are foolish in any sense. I think they believe what they believe. Those firefighters knew that they were coming down here to help people survive. God only knows how many people they helped out of that building, how many people that they were able to rescue. And like I said, if you speak to 1,000 firefighters, they'll give you a story of where they were and what they were doing and how they saved that one particular person, or they pushed somebody out of the way of something falling. God was in every one of us. God put the bravery in every one of us to come down here, to not run away, to go up into those buildings, to try to save people. I don't think you're foolish. I think those men knew what they were doing. I think that they took that risk knowing that they might very well die. I think there was fear in them, but at the same time, they were brave, and they were doing the job that they wanted to do. No one told them that they had to do it. If any one of them would have walked away or run away, every one of us would have understood. We would have never called them cowards. We knew that everybody's life was on the line. They decided on their own, with their faith in God, that everything would be okay, regardless of what the outcome would be.
I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much, sir.
John?
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Randall Sullivan.
Randall, pleasure. John Morbido.
I've been told you have quite a story about what happened to you on the morning of 9/11.
I absolutely have a story from September 11th. Yes, I do.
Somebody told me that what happened to you, some people think, could be a miracle.
I believe that to be true myself. I was right in the middle of the Trade Center when the building was collapsing, and I survived, so...
That sounds incredible right there.
I think, there's probably 1,000 firemen that have similar stories to what happened to them that day. Mine's just one of them. You could probably talk to anybody and they'll let you know exactly what happened to them, but I can tell you my story if you'd like to hear it.
How many people lived who were inside that lobby that day when the building came down?
Initially, we were the first to respond. Ladder Company 10 and Engine Company 10. And immediately we got the ball rolling and gave a signal 1060, which means a major emergency. That gets the ball rolling down with our dispatchers. They began to send everybody, but we were the first ones on the scene at the time. And by the time the second plane attacked the second building, I'd say there were a good 1,000 firefighters down by the Trade Center.
Were you at the station when the first plane hit?
I was in this firehouse when the first plane hit, enjoying my breakfast in the kitchen. I was having some pancakes, and we heard the plane hit the building.
Yeah.
Nobody moved from the table because Lower Manhattan is usually very noisy, trucks going by, kind of echoes with the kind of valley effect between the buildings. And my officer who was covering, he was from a different firehouse. He looked up at me and he said, is that normal, that sound for down here? So anyway, like I was saying, Randall, sorry about the emergency call, but that happened.
Don't be sorry about that.
My officer looked at me and he said, is that normal, that sound for down here? And I said, it's probably truck going by. We hear kind of sounds like that all the time. And with that, a gentleman was in the front having a cigarette, enjoying a beautiful September morning. He had the front doors open and he ran to the kitchen. He said, a plane just hit the World Trade Center. And with that, we jumped up from our seats. We ran to the front of the firehouse. The doors were open. It was pitch black outside. It was a beautiful September morning. The sun was up. and it was pitch black outside. The smoke from the trade center from where the plane had hit was completely blocking out the sun. As I was approaching the front of the firehouse, I could see people cowering in our doorway. They were hiding, they were getting down low, and they were just looking up in fear, and I had no idea what was going on. I assumed it was a small airplane. Maybe somebody had a heart attack because the visibility was excellent. I couldn't think that he accidentally hit the building, but maybe he suffered a heart attack or an ailment and he hit the building. With that, we were ready to respond out. Sean Talon, who was only, he was what we call a probationary firefighter. He had only 11 months on the job. He's 27 years old, former FDNY EMT, and also a Marine, U.S. Marine Corps. He was our youngest guy working that day, so I grabbed him. I said, Sean, stay close to me. I said, we're going to see a lot of really bad things today, but we're going to be all right. I pulled out my fire truck. I was the chauffeur, the driver that day. When I got out onto the apparatus floor, I realized we were already running over bodies in the street. People had been blown out from the trade center. I don't know if they were from the plane or if they had been from the building, but their bodies were on the street.
You couldn't see them, the smoke was that thick.
The smoke and debris and everything was falling from the sky, and people were cowering on the floor. There were already people that were burned and bleeding in front of the firehouse that were getting hit with debris falling. So in my mind, this was unbelievable. It was surreal. What was going on over there? I had no idea what could possibly be happening. It never occurred to me that it might have been a commercial airplane. I looked at my office, I said, these are bodies. To me, it looked like insulation from the building, fake insulation rolled up in the dust. And he said, you gotta go. There's nothing we can do for them, but maybe we can help the people in the upper floors of the building. I said, all right, if you don't mind, I have to just walk around and check my fire truck while we're working here. I pulled out of the firehouse and I made my turn onto West Street, and barreling down towards One World Trade Center on West Street, and with that a gentleman comes out of the building on fire and drops right in front of my fire truck. So I slammed on the brakes, and inadvertently, not knowing it at the time, that gentleman saved my life. Again, that's something that I believe that God put in front of me. He stopped me short of going into the trade center. I jumped out. I wanted to tend to him right away because of his dire need. His body was on fire. His flesh was dropping to the ground. He looked at me with a blank stare. And my company went up into the building. So I stayed with him for a few minutes. I wrapped him with a burn blanket with another firefighter, Terry Rivera, and we put him in an ambulance right away. By the time I had gotten into the trade center, my company was already up on the upper floors. I knew I wouldn't be able to catch up with them, and I knew that if there was any kind of trouble that they would come looking for me, so that I decided to stay in the lobby so that they wouldn't come searching for me and I would put their lives at risk. So now I'm in the lobby of the World Trade Center, and believe it or not, in the lobby, there already were burnt bodies from the jet fuel. I didn't know this at the time, because again, I still didn't know it was a commercial airplane.
These people run down and they fallen?
These people were in the lobby waiting for the elevators to go to the upper floors. The jet fuel from the plane came down into the lobby, and when the elevator doors opened up, they were immediately hit with a fireball. They were incinerated. So there were bodies all over the floor. And again, I'm looking around, oh my God, what could be going on here? This is unbelievable. There was no fire when we pulled in. There was water on the floor from the sprinkler system being set off, and there was broken glass on the floor, and there were bodies on the floor. So immediately we went to the people that were on the floor. There was a gentleman pushed up against the wall. He was burned. He was already dead. There was a woman. She sat up and she was trying to speak to me. Her voice, her throat had closed up and it swollen closed. And she sat up and she was trying to get the words, and I said, stay calm, we'll get you out of here. She was nude, her clothes had burnt off. Her fingertips were gone, they were burned. Her throat had closed up. She laid down and she died right there in front of me. I couldn't do anything to help her, unfortunately. With that, my officer calls me. He says, John, see if you can find out what's going on. I know you're in the lobby. Go out to the outside and look around the perimeter building. See if you can figure out what's happening. So I went to the outside of the building. I looked up. I was in between the two buildings. I made a report. The entire top of the building is on fire. I don't know what we're going to be able to do, but we have to start evacuating these people right now. I went into 2 World Trade Center. There were people there that were like, well, they're telling us to go back to our desks. Get out of these buildings. We don't know what's going on. Move away from these buildings as quickly as possible. With that, they just dropped everything in their hands, and they started running out the door. I went back into 1 World Trade Center, the North Tower, and I was standing in an area with about maybe 40 or 50 firefighters. We were waiting for instructions, what we call a staging area. With that, I heard over a police officer's radio, prepare for impact, the second plane is approaching. I looked at another fireman, I said, we're under attack. He goes, no. I said, oh my God, am I the only one that's not aware that we're under attack? I'm thinking we're dealing with an accident over here and everybody else knows what's going on. Just the cynical fireman, just, typical day's work. Yeah, we're under attack, no big deal. But most of the guys were like me, they didn't know what was happening. With that, the second plane hits tower number 2, the south tower. I still didn't see the plane, so I still had no idea it was a commercial plane. I felt the impact onto the building. The lights flickered, the building shook. I was like, okay, we're under attack. We just got to get these people out of here. Forget about the fire. People begin to coming down the stairs in droves. They're panicking, they're bleeding, they're burning. Women are taking their shoes off to be able to run. The floor's covered in water and broken glass. They're ripping their feet to shreds. To me, it was organized chaos. When they saw us, they were able to follow directions. They were listening to us. They were panicking, but at the same time, they had calmed down and they were listening to what we were saying. We were giving them instructions to head out into the street to get away from the buildings. After only a few minutes, realizing the debris falling from the building was actually killing them. People began to jump. Heavy amounts of debris were falling from the building. The people we were sending out onto the street were being hit by debris. So we stopped sending them into the street and we sent them down into the subways. We figured the subway goes about 4 blocks away. They were able to go into the subway, come up 4 blocks away, they wouldn't be hit by any debris. So we assumed that was our best bet to try to get people out of there.
Were you seeing the jumpers, John?
I could feel them. I could hear them landing on the mezzanine above me. Not one at a
And
time.
you knew that's what it was?
But 10 and 20 at a time. They were raining out of the sky. And when their bodies hit, the impact sounded like an explosion.
So what did you think?
Thought it was the end of the world.
Most of them are just Alright. I want to skip it. What is it?
Randall and I have come to talk to Steve Ross, who is an expert on how buildings fail and what parts of buildings might survive when there's a failure. So I think he's the perfect person to really answer the question of why did people in Stairwell B survive?
What about Stairwell B made it so remarkably sturdy and intact?
Part of it was where it was, and part of it was how it was built. Let me show you a little bit about what a typical floor looked like. If you actually looked at the building itself, the outer wall of the building is here. In the center of this is a core area. And that core area basically has the elevators. There was a big elevator bank on this side, on both towers, very similar. There was a corridor from the tenant spaces that went all the way through. There was another corridor in this direction. And this area was held up with a number of extra beams. So you had beams relatively close together throughout this entire space.
And where are the stairwells?
Stairway A was just off of this corridor. Stairway C was off of this corridor. And Stairway B, the one that survived, was off of the central corridor. So Stairway B was almost in the center of the building. And only Stairway B had 3 big beams fairly close. It was kind of in the corner. The aircraft hit very high up, about the 94th floor, and it caused damage throughout this area. Remember, this area here was really the sanctuary, particularly right about in the middle of it. That's where Stairway B was. And so what happened is the plane hit here on the 94th floor. There were about 10 floors above it. Once the steel gets above 600 degrees or so, it loses most of its structural strength. As the floors collapsed on one another and pancaked on top of one another on the way down, by the time it got down to the lower floors, you had the weight of 75 floors of building pressing on this area. But fortunately, the debris field by then had spread wider, and so it scattered outward.
So essentially, was Stairwell B the only survivable area of Tower 1?
Yes, this area was that survival zone, basically from floor 4 or 6 up to floor 22, where a fair amount of void existed. People survived, and those lives were there to be saved. How they got there?
Yeah.
Not for me to answer.
I'm actually gonna do something. Hold up.
Speaking to Steve Ross, I think made it quite clear that it was actually the physical characteristics of the building that made the destruction of Stairwell B less likely than some other parts of the building.
With 110 stories of steel and cement collapsing all around you, the likelihood of survival is almost non-existent. But these people did survive, almost unscathed.
The life of Lauren Manning is an unforgettable lesson in the power of hope and strength. A former executive and partner of Capital, Cantor Fitzgerald has endured catastrophic injuries and devastating loss when terror struck the World Trade Center on 9/11. Manning's will to live and her resolve to rebuild her life continues to resonate powerfully around the world more than a decade later. Lauren recounts her journey in her best-selling memoir, Unmeasured Strength. She is also the subject of New York Times bestseller, Love, Greg and Lauren. The recipient of many honors. Among them, Lauren was chosen as one of CNN's most intriguing newsmakers through their first 25 years and was named Glamour Magazine's Woman of the Year. Manning is the co-founder and chief strategist for uboard.net, and she is also a managing director of Golden Seeds, one of the nation's leading early-stage investment firms, focused on funding opportunities for women-led companies. Currently, Lauren is involved with iPads for Soldiers. She also serves on the board of Sanctuary for Families and the advisory board of Glamour Magazine's Woman of the Year. Here to share with us her amazing story of courage and resilience, please join me in welcoming Lauren Manning.
Thank you. It is wonderful to be here with you all today. Today is particularly a special honor for me because my presence on this stage was so highly unlikely 13 years ago. But because in no small part, because of people in your profession, I am here to tell the story. We are connected, I believe, not because of background, geography, or education, or in spite of, but rather in a much grander way. We are united by the compelling and unified desire to seek the best outcome, to succeed, to win. Right now, in sick rooms, from Africa to Spain to right here in Dallas, wherever there is a nurse, there is the most miraculous global force occurring, united for the cause of one, fighting for each individual, trying to protect us all. You, the nurses, are the sentries defending the position that can't be surrendered. The commandos who must meet every situation on the ground and rely on their training to prevail, who refuse to leave any man or woman behind.
Oh my God. You don't believe I actually changed my front-facing camera.
When I suffered my injuries in 2001, the truth was I should have died by any objective analysis. I existed far outside of the bell curve. I was told it, I heard it repeatedly by the doctors. Yet I survived. And not just because I believed I would, but because despite their doubt, no one surrendered to the overwhelming odds. When I was admitted to the burn floor on the evening of September 11th, I heard of this wild-eyed nurse standing by the elevator, masked and gloved, all 6'7" of him, like a soldier ready to attack. And he grimly shouted next as my gurney rolled by. That was Andrew Greenway, who would prove to be one of the kindest, finest, most talented, and emotionally generous nurses on that floor. And he was the last person I would hug when I was discharged from that ICU 3 months later. That night, though, he had his war face on, and he and his team were engaged in a battle on my behalf and the few other survivors that had made it onto that floor that night. Thanks to their teamwork, I lived to deliver a message to you today, which is that if you believe, you will prevail and you will succeed, whatever your trials may be, because I believe that ultimately love for what you do, love for what you believe is possible, even improbable, is what defined my survival. That love brought hope, and that hope was everywhere. I turned to it in the darkest of times. Now, imagine taking a step back, going to work today, much as you've entered this conference center, walked across the skywalk, and as you walk into the exhibit hall lobby, a violent attack begins. What turns out to be the worst peacetime attack in the history of this country. You entered the building healthy on a routine day, and suddenly you find yourself covered in flames. Now imagine being exiled to another world of unconsciousness and waking up to a life and a world that would never be the same. Now think about it. What would you do? What would be the first thing you would do? Well, I come here today to tell you a story about the probable and the impossible. And what I did when something happened to me that could have happened to any one of us on any given day. It is a story about mastering fear and about finding your own unmeasured strength.
Dude, I am laughing so hard.
I've lived a life filled with challenges, failure, and success, and with the story I'd like to tell you about my own crisis and transformation. I hope you'll tune in to hear about the journey once upon a time, 13 years ago. So let me start at the beginning. I grew up in a small town as a young child in Germany named Waldorf, and later another bastion of internationalism of New Jersey, in that housewife town, Franklin Lakes, until I went to college in New York City. Except for a brief time, I've called that home ever since. I was raised by a homemaker mom who forsook a medical, as had many generations of our family in the U.S. And upon his release, he finished his graduate degree and he entered the corporate ranks of ITT, a very large conglomerate back in the 60s and 70s. He had a military bearing and a baritone voice and a very firm handshake. He commanded respect, and I know that he left more than one boyfriend of mine quaking in his sneakers. But believe me when I tell you, my mom was just as tough-minded as he was. Beneath it all, they were kind and generous, and most of all, they listened. They had the ability to listen, which I also often found frustrating at times when I didn't believe they were listening to me. They believed in hard work, perseverance, and no shortcuts really, because they don't really happen often in reality. And not uniquely, my work ethic as a teenager was the opposite, total rebellion. So my brother and sister and I lived a fairly traditional home life, and academically things came pretty easy for me. And as I got older, I left for college a year early, and I had an epiphany, an existential crisis of sorts, and I was gripped by a fear I'd never felt before. I questioned everything, and I thought, medieval history, Renaissance literature, what is it all about? And I couldn't get it anymore, and I said to my parents, why am I bothering with it? And they eventually said to me, well, why do bother with it? We are not paying for it, so if you want to go, you will pay for it yourself. I found myself at that time with no job, no income, and no future. And so with no other option, I looked in the local paper, and I found myself a job at a local pharmacy, working the counter. And for the next 9 months, I graduated to assistant stock manager. I went to school at night at a local college, and I began to figure things out. And I came to share in their belief in the importance of hard work. I'd finally gotten it. And I began to understand that sometimes you gotta go here before you can go there. And although it may not seem logical, it makes sense perhaps in the long run. And I became less afraid of being that perfect child and continued to make mistakes, but allowing myself to. And I felt okay about it. Once out of college, I wanted nothing more than to work on Wall Street. And so I went to work at Lehman Brothers. I was able to get a job in their coveted training program, and I worked for a guy named Marty Shafroff. And as I started working at Lehman Brothers for a grand total of, I think, $16,000 a year, and hopeful to get a bonus, I started working toward my master's degree. Wall Street was a tough place to work, especially for women, and it still is in many ways. But I wanted it. I loved it. I worked 60, 70 plus hours a week, and I couldn't get enough of it. And as with most businesses, after a few years, those who lacked the skills and the commitment or the stamina were weeded out, like fired or attrition. And the most successful people I found were people who had the most conviction, the most passion. They weren't always the smartest. They were the most driven. And I realized success was driven entirely by what you put into it. That simple equation, which we all understand. There was no sense of entitlement on the street. And what I learned was if you studied your client and your business well enough, you could overcome your fears, their concerns. You could engage their trust, and that trust was the key to unlocking money, to building a deal, to getting a deal done. I was involved in some of Wall Street's biggest deals, biggest transformations. I weathered the stock market crash of 1987, the dot-com crash in the early 90s, the LDC bond debacle, tried to start a financial consultancy only to see it fail, and I endured a host of other challenges in what is, much like your own world, an unforgiving world of finance. And in 1992, I joined Cantor Fitzgerald, one of the world's leading bond and brokerage firms. I came in to run the business development group to push into carbon and emissions and interest rate swap areas, and did pretty well. And not long after, I was asked to lead the initiative to move the Treasury bond market from voice brokering to an electronic black box known as eSpeed. Now, The Treasury bond market was $1 trillion a year market, $20 trillion to be exact at that time. It was a Wild West kind of thing. Guys, women on the phone, giving color, giving market insight, a lot of entertaining. Back then it was all voice, again, all people. Hundreds of millions of dollars, with a couple of spoken words. The traders who spoke the words to the brokers loved the comforting voice. Nobody wanted a change. eSpeed was faster, it was cheaper. But unsurprisingly, they wanted none of it. They were making a lot of money, and their motto was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. My job was to overcome with my team that intense opposition. And it wouldn't be like herding cats, it was more like herding the most serious alpha dogs on Wall Street. And their resistance, ultimately, I found out, came from fear. But it didn't make them any less ferocious, but it signaled the path forward. So rather than challenging them, I got them together in a more collegial atmosphere, sat down, put the broker on the site with them, with that black box they were so fearful of, and things began to clarify and correct. Mistakes weren't made as much as they thought. The brokers at the site was the answer to the solution. They knew their broker wasn't going to be fired. And therein began an evolutionary change in the business. Now fast forward, a year ago, that company was sold to NASDAQ for nearly $1 billion. And the firms who refused to adapt have long since disappeared. But the firms with the courage to try new things are still around. And what I learned in the financial markets was, if you make a mistake, millions, trillions can be lost in a minute, and your career over in the next. The company, yourself, fail. So success in business, I learned, became a matter of life and death. And then one day, I experienced a crisis that taught me the opposite was equally true, that life and death are a matter of business. By the fall of 2001, I had become the head of Cantor Fitzgerald's Global Market Data Division. The firm was trading over $30 trillion a year in treasuries. I ran the data side of that $150 million a year business. At that time, we were bringing in-house. And I was managing director and partner with an office up on the 105th floor of One World Trade, North Tower, you may know it. And on September 11th, I was heading for my office, as I did every day. But it was about 30 minutes later than usual, because of an epic dog ate my homework story involving a fresh apple pie, a house key, and a black Labrador retriever. We had a small farmhouse upstate. We rented it out during the summer, and we were refinancing it. Our tenant had left the key to the house, taped to an apple pie bag, which was an apple pie for a caretaker, left it on her door. And that morning when she let out Maggie, Maggie had an extra special treat. The apple pie was gone, the key was gone. That dog had a roughage for the day, no doubt. But when Mary called me to tell me the story, I couldn't have been more annoyed. I had a meeting that morning, I was running late, had a 10-month-old at home, waiting for the sitter to come in. I hustled, finally got someone to bring over another key. So I was still annoyed at the delays as I headed down to the trade center, about a mile from my house. And parked under that porte cochere in the cab, quickly paid the driver, hustled to get out, running into the building. As I walked into the building, I smiled at two women who were standing on my right as I turned toward the elevator banks that would start my trip up to the 105th floor. When suddenly, the entire building shuddered. Everything moved. It was as if the 110-story tower had somehow jumped. And unbeknownst to me, at that moment, the first plane had just been crashed into the North Tower's 91st floor, cutting through the central core of the building. The atmosphere was surreal, and it was punctuated by a piercing whistling sound that grew steadily louder. Now the elevator has the tower has 99 elevators, but only 3 ran up the full 110 stories. And that screaming sound was the massive onrushing of compressed air, the jet fuel explosion careening down those 3 elevator shafts with a direct path to the lobby. The sound grew intensely loud, and a second later, these explosions travel at thousands of feet per second, a wall of fire and 1,000-degree heat burst from the elevator banks, igniting everything in its path. The blast spun me around, and there was a gale force backdraft back toward the elevators that pulled me in toward the fire. My voice was powerless. I could not speak. I could not breathe. There was a velocity of wind that seemed like hundreds of miles an hour, filled with flames enveloping me. And as I turned to struggle against it, where the 2 women had been standing moments before, their bodies lay on the floor, covered in flames. And like them, I was on fire. 40-foot-high glass wall of the lobby finally exploded outward, and the air rushed back in to fill the void of the explosion, and it seemed like forever that howling wind screamed in my ears as I was thrown out and literally dropped where I'd stood just moments before outside that porte cochere. Now I had traveled back maybe 60 feet, but I was in a completely different world. The flames continued to penetrate, and I thought, this can't be real, but it was. The pain was unimaginable. The burn's grip was crushing, a weightless force with an infinite power. Everywhere around me was smoke and destruction. And across that highway, West Street was a single strip of grass by the World Financial Center. Only grass in sight, and I knew my only chance to potentially put out the flames. And so I ran toward it. And that journey across West Street's 6 lanes of highway seemed to last for an eternity. I felt myself going down as I careened over a barrier, but I willed myself forward because all I could think of at that moment was my son, Tyler, just 10 months old at the time, and I screamed, I can't leave you now. I won't leave you now. I haven't had you long enough. And as I reached the grass, I went to do what we all learned in grade school. I dropped and rolled. And as I started to do that, 2 men came across that hill, a trader and a bond salesman from, of all places, Lehman Brothers. They'd come running to help those few they were able to get out of the building who, like me, had been on fire. One of them grabbed his jacket and started to help me put out the last of the flames. And as I lay there on my back, I looked up at the sheer cliff of the building where I had worked. And amid the agony, I heard distant sounds of glass breaking and steel wailing as it bent and twisted, crashing to the ground. Objects started to come crashing to the ground, and the tower's upper stories were in flames, and it was easy to see that it was the 105th floor and above my office. And through the haze of that all-consuming pain, drilling deeper and deeper, somewhat improbably, I saw the second jet hit, and then I knew it had not been an accident. I'd been there in '93 when the terrorists first hit us, and now I knew they had come back for us. We always imagined that they would. And the others, as I looked across the grass, who had fled, now lay motionless and unresponsive, and I felt my myself too slipping away, and I felt that in that moment, if I could just close my eyes and sink down into that darkness, it would all be gone. Somehow the pain would be gone. And the impulse to let go became overwhelming. And for an unspeakable moment, I prayed for death, though I did not believe that even death could release me from this pain. And then I realized with a strange but certain clarity that this was it. This was my moment, my choice. I either had to keep fighting or surrender, and I would die on the side of that highway. And so I made my choice. I decided to live. I refused to give in. I fought to remain awake, and I used that pain that came in ever larger swells to ground myself. I became hyper aware. My hands looked. I was still alert. When an ambulance, as they were pulling up, kept pulling to the other side, finally pulled up in what seemed like the nearest one on the other side of the street. Of course, the EMTs all running the other way into the building. But I knew that this was it. This was my last chance. And somehow I managed to walk
strange about these body parts.
to Bond Trader, who stayed on that hill.
Ceremonial dancing.
Back more 100 feet across that highway to that ambulance. So they threw me on a gurney and shoved me into the floor of the ambulance. And the ambulance didn't move, though. No one came to take care of me. My agony grew, and I screamed for help. The benches on either side became crowded with people, torn pants, bleeding legs. They all looked away from me, and still no one tended me. And I knew then that I had been pegged as a goner. But one woman didn't look away. She told the EMT's help her, Mrs. Rivera. Someone laid a jacket over me, and at last, the ambulance finally moved. Nearly 55 minutes after that first plane hit, less than 10 minutes before the South Tower fell. My first stop that morning was St. Vincent's Hospital down in the West Village. They didn't know burn protocol down there that well for such a case as this. They hooked me up to a morphine drip that I was to use with my hands. Of course, I couldn't use it. The city was now on lockdown. Gerson Cornell Burn Center uptown for protocol. The doctor stood in the hallway, unconscious throughout all of this. I say, call my husband, call my husband. He comes to my side. I say, am I going to be all right? He says, you'll be just fine. So at that moment, we took one another at our words. He would only tell me later about the black and grilled skin filling the air. And as he looked out the door, a social worker walked by, and she would later recount a story to us. The social worker went down to the chapel. The city's on lockdown. Any medical personnel that were in that city, visiting or otherwise, gathered at the front doors of hospitals, ready to help. That nurse prayed, then she went out into the corridor and said, do we have any burn doctors here? Do we have any burn nurses? And in answer to her prayer, two women stepped forward, two nurses from Minnesota. They were visiting the city. Here they were. They stepped forward in answer to her prayers, came upstairs, scrubbed up, and began the care that I needed. I was intubated 5 hours. 5 hours after I'd been hit. Finally, they started the necessary care. That night, the city had expected thousands and thousands of survivors. But as you all know, that wasn't the case. So they finally released me out of the lockdown, and on a quiet night, streets filled only with soldiers and the ghosts of those few survivors. Dead. I took my trip up to Weill Cornell. I had sustained an 82.5% burn, most of it 3rd degree. Skin, as you know, is your largest organ. Most of mine was burned away through the dermis or even deeper. And as you probably know, they calculate your odds of survival based upon the total body area burned. So my odds at best were 17.5%. And those odds quickly dropped into single digits and near zero during a series of crises that would last for months at a time. I was put into an induced coma for nearly 2 months, during which I endured a series of lethal infections, amputations, collapsed lungs, and a host of other challenges that I will endure the rest of my life. And when I at last woke up, I was more helpless than an infant. I could not speak on my own. I could not breathe on my own. I could in no way take in food or perform any bodily function. Picture you see here is a bit later, and it would not be until late November, after Cheryl, many, and another, and when I finally got there, they turned me down, caught a real clip from behind, and my chair. And that simple journey felt harder than anything, as I came to call it. I became ambulatory again, and it was a tough task would be. They said, step out into the hallway. I thought, well, I want that nurse's desk. That seems to be where all the... Now, at the time, which was to walk with assistance 40 feet to that nurse's station. And as I began to walk, doctors and other nurses on the ward and therapists gathered around, and my nurse ran out into the hallway because it was the morning to see my clapping, cheering, and I could not imagine why. And what I realized at that point was that they had invested their hope in me, and that my journey was their journey, and that this was certainly a joint celebration. And in that moment, a true band of air. 90 days to the day, I am released by virtue of their nominal agreed to tolerate failure in my own during my stay there. There never would have been. But I must stop for a moment and pause back to the most miraculous November. There I was, gussied up in my finest bandages in the hospital white, sitting in a wheelchair, to dab on the outside of a bandage. He can't recognize you, he may recognize the scent. I was afraid, I was petrified that he wouldn't recognize me, that, worse yet, he would be repulsed by me, for I looked nothing like the mother who had left him a few months ago. And as they wheeled me out that morning, I looked down the hallway, and there was this little boy pushing a toy, a little red balloon on it, saying, "I love you," down the hallway. And he came up to me, and he looked at me, and he looked away. My heart sank. And then he turned back. My mom saying, "That's your mom, that's your mom." It's our little girl. And a small smile came across his face. And I looked at that child, and everything that I had hoped and prayed and fought for was embodied in that moment, being reunited with that little boy. We began to share many of the same milestones as we were learning to walk together and speak. And as I mentioned, countless surgeries in 90 days to the day, I shipped out to Burke Rehabilitation Hospital, where I would spend more than 3 months rebuilding my strength and really starting the rebuilding of my life. My son and my husband were there every weekend. My husband was there every night. During that period of time, I first came to look in the mirror, and I looked into a mirror where I knew as my ear had crumbled away on the pillow, seeing black flecks, that it was gone. And I looked at a face that was so cool, but I saw my eyes, and I knew that although this rolling, panicking feeling inside me was there, and I cried, I had my pity party, and I knew I had to get over it. It was still my face, my ear that I had left. And I thought about that fear that paralyzed me years ago, and I embraced it, and I wanted to crush it. And so I redirected my energy. And a little more than half a year after that beautiful morning I'd left for the office, at last I was returning home. And what surrounded me during all those months were people like you see here. The nurses, therapists, my parents, that love, that holds and lifts us. What was a united team effort at every single step in the way. Now the second leg, though, of my campaign would begin back at home, and I would face years of operations, healing, rehabilitation. As many of you may know, I would need to wear compression garments, nothing pleasant, nothing like you wear to cover a little bulge here and there, a silicone mask on my face, 24 hours a day, layers of silicone to control scarring, hypertrophic scarring, and what I knew at that point was the greater part of my recovery still lay in front of me. But I also knew what I wanted. My goals were clear. I wanted my life back. I wanted to do the smallest things we take for granted, spending time with family and friends, going for a walk, picking up my son and holding him. Yet out of the hospital, it was very apparent that the world had moved on, and I began to really appreciate how incredibly weak I was. But despite all the strengthening, I got tired easily and I was easily exhausted. But as you yourselves know, exhaustion doesn't matter. I had a hard deadline. In the burn business, you have 24 months to maximize the extent that your limbs will move, and beyond that, you are in lockdown. And the world would not stop for me. I would just have to catch up. So in a sense, I was starting back on the bottom, and it would be years before everyday tasks were once again familiar and routine. So I went to work. Rehabilitation was my full-time job. I had hopes of an entry-level job anyway, which was getting back to everyday life. I did it 6 days a week, and on the 7th, someone came into my home and helped me out as well. I remember pushing my son's stroller on a windy March day, the sense of accomplishment. My hands were bloody just from the touch of pushing it, but I felt just like every mother out there. I remember going to the movies with my husband, when finally I was able to remove the gloves for a few hours at a time. And we slipped in there in the dark, and I felt like everyone else, and he wrapped his hand in mine, and for one of the first times in months, I felt my flesh against another's. I've come a long way since those early days, and I knew my life would be forever different, but I learned that different was okay, and that ultimately change really is the only constant in our lives. So I had to embrace the life I still had, but I couldn't have traveled a further distance from where I had begun. But the skills that brought me the success involved, building a career and rebuilding a life, were the same. Surrounding yourself with a good team, making sure you understand the business. And I want to share a few of them with you today. Lesson 1, defeat is temporary. My parents had raised my sister, my brother, and I to understand simply, things happen. My dad would say, and you're not the first one they've happened to. When they do, there's only one direction to go, and that is forward. I had been catastrophically injured in an act of war. My battlegrounds were sterilized rooms. My battleground surgical gowns and masks and splints and bandages. Pain was my enemy. I studied it, I anticipated the ways it would take me down, and each night I laid in that darkened room, hoping to fall asleep, crafting my battle plan for the next day. And I always ask myself the same question: how can I win tomorrow? So I brought the battle to my enemy, the pain, the joints that wouldn't move, the skin that wouldn't move. I chose to attack rather than surrender. Another lesson I learned was something that I had believed as a young person inside. And when I looked into that mirror and knew I was different, I managed to take it in but move beyond the obvious truth. And I realized holding on to those negative emotions wasn't going to help, but I could let them coexist. And I took that energy, and even though I was far from fully healed, I would need to bring everything I had to it every day. I faced a mountain of ongoing surgeries, one about every 7 weeks, physical and occupational therapy continuing 6 days a week. But I willed myself to look beyond the circumstances, and I designed that if I could project a confidence, I could be so resolved and so present and unharmed that people wouldn't see me as a terribly injured person. They wouldn't notice the scars. And at some point over the last 12 years, although the mirror still tells a different reality, that charade became a reality. And I feel that that injured woman disappeared and a new version of myself, my old self, emerged. Because even in the most unpredictable of situations, when chaos is all around you, and especially then, the ability to focus on your core vision is essential. And the answer to why I survived against all medical odds, you all are in your business, I believe because I willed my mind and my body back to the world. Because of love. And yes, I had the help of many, but there is, and I had a stronger belief in my power to prevail than any fear that I wouldn't. And that was my strength. I dared to imagine not what was probable, but what I dreamed possible. During my recovery, there were many breakthroughs and there were just as many setbacks. And I figured, bring it on. The harder it comes, the harder I'm going to push back. And I began to enjoy that continual push. And as I had in business, starting a company, only to pour my heart into it and see it fail, there will be to begin to understand was those defeats were temporary, those setbacks. And I could let them become part of who I was without conquering me. When I knew that fingers would no longer work again, when further amputations had to occur. And what I came to understand is certainly the challenge of business defeats. Find a way to use that disruptive power to my advantage, to your advantage. Remember, love what you do because the path to success is the same as the path to failure. And despite all the best tactical and strategic planning, the unexpected always happens, doesn't it? The virus with no good antidote. The competitor that appears out of nowhere. The technology that dramatically changes the landscape in your community. What we thought we understood on a day of stark terror out of a clear blue sky changed everything. But what I learned is you can't regret what you haven't done, and you have to look to what you can do. I confronted defeat, but it was only my response that ultimately really mattered. And it was also often after innumerable breaking points where I never thought I'd be able to flex my ankle again or put my left shoulder down, that success finally began to come to me. And if I could fight through that fire, if I could extinguish those flames, get out of that war zone, if I could take that next breath and then learn to walk again, to talk again, to use my hands again, to live with a body that was forever changed, different than before, that living was still here for the taking, and I considered it a win. Because one of the keys to success in business, as you know, is knowing when you're presented with a true choice and when you aren't. When you may think you have an option, you need to understand when you really don't, because if you cannot execute that plan, you got the wrong plan. You've got to revise it, or you will fail. Be persistent. We don't know how strong we are until strong is our only option. I knew that day I was not going to fold up and die by the side of the highway. I made that decision But the fact is, all of us experience adversity when we feel we are at our weakest. Yet later, as I did looking back, I saw that even then I had the power to choose, the power to act. And I realized a strength that had not been measured until that critical moment. And at that point, I felt it. It felt boundless. And just as you and we as individuations face these tests, we tell ourselves, if we only knew then what we know now. But if that exercise teaches us anything, it's that if we had understood our true power then, we may not have felt such doubt. Think about the times you felt that way. The real lesson is not about how strong you were, were back then. It is about how strong you are right here, right now. That is your unmeasured strength. My own unmeasured strength brought me from beneath those burning towers to stand in front of you today. It carried me on a journey I told you was measured in the smallest of increments. My hands were so badly burned, no one could say I would ever regain any function. The notion was I'd probably have just 2 mitts at the end of my arms. When I left the eye surgery full of joint fusions, the years, my hand from work went from this to this to this. And I was finally able to make a fist. I was finally able to wrap my hand in my son's own. And this is your unmeasured strength. This hand is my power, as it is for all of us, that no matter what is happening, there is a power we all have inside of us to persevere. And my experience of injury and recovery confirms that in crisis, attitude is everything. Attitude faces the tone of an organization. It influences that nurse's floor that you are on. It influences the decisions and actions of yourself and of others, our associates, our teams, even our enemies, because I showed my commitment and I was able to recruit others to my cause. I worked with nurses. I worked with people who were just as committed. This is how great transformations are made. There are many kinds of leadership, but there is only one criterion for success, and you all know it. It's results. I wanted 100% recovery, and that's what I stand for, 100%. And those that were up to the task joined me, and together we achieved that goal. We worked harder, longer, and more than we ever, epiphany in realizing that we are capable of far more than we imagine at times. Because how we act in times of adversity defines us. The nurses on the floor of that ICU, the nurses at Burke Rehabilitation Hospital, the nurses in hospitals that I've been at since then, they stood there. They understand that in every life there is a reckoning. And when you face it, you have a choice. Panicking is easy. And if you panic, or if I panicked back then, I would have been dead. But as that Chinese maxim says, crisis and opportunity are really the same, right? A mishandled opportunity becomes a crisis, and a well-managed crisis can become an opportunity. My father, before the Marine, said things are going to happen. And when they did, there was only one direction to go, and that was forward. And often, he would crystallize that advice into a simple, elegant proverb, which meant, get over it. And that's exactly what he said. Get over it. In the toughest of times, in the latest of innings, against the greatest challenges, how we respond reveals our true character. Every day we begin again with the choice, which is really just a series hundreds of thousands of deliberate choices, all of them answering the same question. Asking myself, as you ask yourself, am I willing to get in the game? Am I prepared to do what it takes to win? These are the moments we have to rebuild, when we have to start over, when we have no choice but to accept our fate. I have faced those defeats, but I would not believe I was defeated. All of us have not been poor spirits who neither enjoy much nor suffer much, because they live in the gray twilight that knows not victory nor defeat. I want to be remembered to have dared mighty things, to have won glorious triumphs, even though checked by failure so many times. When you open your eyes, it is a privilege. This is it. This day, right here, right now, can change how people think by the way you think. Strategize beyond the obvious. Look at what actually makes things work, not what people tell you is the way it works. Find the truth. Do what you're good at, but also do what you need to do in order to get there. Every day, you have a choice. Will you choose the gray twilight of complacency, or will you dare mighty things? I had a stronger belief in my power to prevail than in any fear I wouldn't, and that was my unmeasured strength. Will you gather your courage and take those steps? The steps of commitment, the steps of leadership that will be remembered for generations within your family, within your community. Find your passion, be relentless, and meet every day with your own unmeasured strength. For the first World Around torch bearing in 2004, that was an ultimate win for me. Standing and running on behalf of our nation with a flame above my head, I could not have been any prouder. Remember, every day, you have a choice. Make it count. Thank you. You are amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.